President Bola Tinubu joins regional leaders to commemorate ECOWAS at 50, celebrating a legacy of regional integration. Half a century after West African leaders gathered here in Lagos to sign a bold vision into reality, the region stands at a crossroads, celebrating unity, yet confronting deep fractures from military coups, economic challenges, and shifting alliances. As regional leaders reenact the Lagos Declaration, we ask what remains of the dream. But beyond geopolitics, we're also turning our spotlight on the show today on the heartbeat of the nation, its women and children, from tackling gender-based violence to empowering millions through national programs. The Ministry of Women Affairs faces both immense pressure and incredible opportunity. Joining us tonight, Professor David Awurawo, historian and international relations expert, helps us unpack the past as well as the future of ECOWAS, while the Honorable Minister of Women Affairs, Hajia Imam Sulaiman Ibrahim, gives us an inside look at the ministry's midterm report card and national priorities. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines.
This celebration would not only be a moment of rejoicing, but also a moment of reflection and introspection.
Exactly 50 years ago today, in this very city of Lagos, 15 West African leaders signed what would become the Lagos Treaty, giving birth to ECOWAS. Their goal is a unified region where people, goods, and opportunities could move freely. The regional bloc today stands at a crossroads, celebrating a legacy of regional integration while grappling with security breakdowns, democratic setbacks, as well as the dramatic exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. To help us navigate this complex moment is Professor David Awurawo, Professor of International Relations and Head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos. Thank you for joining us on the program this evening.
Thank you for having me.
At the beginning, May 28, 1975, what would you say were the political and economic conditions that made the Lagos Treaty both possible and necessary at the time, even though if the information about you on the internet is correct, I understand you were just about 6 years old at the time, Prof.
Yes, I was very young when the ECOWAS was formed, but I have come to learn a lot about ECOWAS over time. I even discussed with General Gowon a few years ago about ECOWAS, and he was very happy to know that ECOWAS is still functioning well and still making efforts to fulfill the objectives for which the regional body was established in 1975. But the context for the establishment was that in the 1970s, regional integration had become very popular. Virtually every region of the world was making efforts to establish some form of economic cooperation and integration. And West Africa was not going to be left behind. Fortunately, Gowon faced the matter and discussed with other, heads of state and government across West Africa. He had as a close ally, former President Nasingbe Yadema of Togo, and they worked together, negotiated with other, states across the sub-region, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and the rest. And then the result was the founding of ECOWAS, with the treaty signed on the 28th of May, 1975. Of course, the objectives are very clear. Article 3 of the treaty states the objectives: economic cooperation, economic development, economic integration, towards the improvement of the quality of lives and peoples of West Africa. Very straightforward. Those are the objectives of ECOWAS. It has tried to ensure that these objectives are met over the years, but of course, we know that the road is still very far because the achievements have been very modest in this regard.
Yeah, talking about where we are and where we're supposed to be, what's your assessment of the vision behind ECOWAS as emerging by the leaders you just mentioned about? You just talked about President Eyadema and then General Yakubu Gowon, who today is the only surviving founding leader. Would you say that vision has been fully realized, halfway realized, or lost altogether?
I would say halfway realized. It's not lost altogether. West Africa has carried out economic integration over the years, with some success here and there, not anywhere near the level that
Prof, we lost you for a minute. Can you hear me now? Professor David Awurawo is our guest today as we continue to explore precisely what has happened to the sub-region bloc called ECOWAS. There are conversations as to what are the key achievements of ECOWAS in the last 50 years, especially in the area of trade, peacekeeping, or diplomacy. If you look back, you wonder how stakeholders assess ECOWAS' role in peacekeeping interventions in countries like Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the Gambia, compared to what we're experiencing today with the Sahel crisis. Professor Awurawo, we lost you for a minute. I'd like you to just highlight for us what you consider the top achievements of the sub-regional bloc in the past 50 years, especially in areas of peacekeeping or diplomacy, because quite a number of references have been made to the peacekeeping interventions in Liberia and Sierra Leone. When you compare that with the crisis currently rocking the Sahel, what has happened over the years?
Yeah, thank you. I was saying that the basis for the establishment of ECOWAS, which was to promote integration and development in the sub-region, very clear. And it was in line with the experiences of West Africa in the 60s and 70s. After independence in the 60s, the expectations were that West Africa would develop very rapidly. Of course, Africa at large as well developed very rapidly. And the development would, of course, translate to a high level of life for West Africans. But that optimism did not materialize. By the end of the 1960s, Africa as a whole, and West Africa also in particular, was actually poorer. I mean, the level of development was lower than what it was in 1960. And so economic integration was seen as one of the avenues to promote rapid development across the sub-region. So it was one of the reasons why ECOWAS was established in 1975. But so much has happened, since that time. You just spoke about Liberia and Sierra Leone. Liberia and Sierra Leone were in crisis in the late 1980s and early 1990s. West African leaders, discovered that if they allowed these the states to fail, because Liberia and Sierra Leone were leading to failed states, it will negatively impact on development, in the sub-region. And so they took measures to contain the violence in the two countries, first in Liberia from 1989 when ECOMOG was formed, and then, of course, later in Sierra Leone, of course, stretching later to Guinea-Bissau. These efforts were made to ensure that stability existed in the sub-region, which would promote economic development. The debates went on as to whether what ECOWAS did was illegal or not, because the Treaty of 1975 did not provide for military intervention, which was why we had a revised treaty in 1993, which came to address some of these issues of military intervention and security in the sub-region. Beyond Liberia, Sierra Leone, Guinea-Bissau, and a few other places where we've had conflict in West Africa, well, of course, we have had terrorism, jihadism, and insurgency across West Africa as well. Mali, Burkina, in fact, in the whole of the Sahel, we have had, this conflict. West African countries came together to, try to, combat this problem with some success. But now, the exit of some of these countries from ECOWAS, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, I would say has been detrimental to regional efforts to combat violence, especially in the northern parts of West Africa.
But what we've seen in the past decade is that nearly half of ECOWAS member states have experienced coups or attempted coup. And you're wondering, is that a failure on the part of ECOWAS protocol on democracy and good governance, or it's just a broader regional crisis of legitimacy that has come to stay?
Well, there's a whole lot that West African leaders can do to get ECOWAS in the direction that it should be. One of those things is to pay more attention to tackling violence in the sub-region. Violence has been a major problem. It has been a major issue which has been detrimental to the development of the sub-region. More efforts need to be, attention need to be paid to combating violence in the sub-region. Without that, economic development cannot take place in a manner in which West African states will want. Then, second, West African leaders need to pay attention to diversification of the economies of different countries in the sub-region. If the economies are not diversified, it becomes impossible for West African countries to trade.
It appears we lost connection with Dr. Urawo for a minute. He was just talking about what needs to be done differently with what we've seen in the past decade, with nearly half of the West African, the ECOWAS states members having some threats of coup or even outright coup, which was responsible for the exit of the three countries we talked about earlier. There are also... Prof.
Yes.
We lost you again, but I can hear you now.
Yeah, I think I'm back now.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead.
Yes. Coups in West Africa are as detrimental to economic integration as, instability, violence in the sub-region. Because coups, of course, the provisions in ECOWAS, emphasize democratic governance. Democratic governance, governments with the popular participation and with the consent of the people. Military governments are not with the consent of the people. That is why when each time there is a coup, you see ECOWAS will come out and condemn it, impose sanctions, and even sometimes threaten military intervention to restore whoever was overthrown. So these coups in Burkina Faso, in Mali and Niger have been, detrimental. Of course, we saw how ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Mali. So hard that Mali came to start begging the rest of ECOWAS states and even requesting that, they would start a process of democratization more rapidly than they had initially proposed. But Niger, it became more, rebellious, so to speak, and, more forceful about pulling out of ECOWAS if ECOWAS, the other member countries don't accept the legitimacy of, the government there. And so, of course, we've seen what happened in January this year. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso pulled out, bringing the number to 12. They were 16 before. Mauritania left in 2000. Of course, returned in 2 years ago, in 2017, not as a full member, but an active member. So from 16 down to 15, from 15 down to 12. Now, ECOWAS leaders, there are things they can do to at least help to reduce these coups. A major issue in these schools has been civilian government not governing well. So good governance will help to reduce schools. That's one. Second, some West African leaders have been known to change constitutions from 2 terms to 3 terms, 4 terms. I mean, it's a major issue within the sub-region. ECOWAS leaders need to develop the courage to tell themselves the truth, that they should stay within term limit. 2 terms, spend your 2 terms, govern well, and then hand over to another government. If this happens, schools will be reduced to the barest minimum within the sub-region, and by extension, it will promote and enhance the ability of ECOWAS to achieve integration and promote development within the sub-region. So these are things that ECOWAS leaders need to do in the immediate. And of course, there should also be long-term plans for economic diversification, which will also, of course, promote and enhance West African trade. Right now, West African trade, the countries of West Africa trade among themselves is less than 15%, which is very low, compared with the EU, that is about 70%. So there's a whole long way to go, for ECOWAS to actually achieve the objectives that are clearly stated in Article 3 of the ECOWAS Treaty.
I've heard stakeholders also say that perhaps the energy with which ECOWAS disapproves of military intervention, they should also adopt that in calling it the leadership in the region accountable, especially when you hear of reports of corruption and, some instinct to just want to outstay their welcome as elected leaders.
You cannot be more correct. If we have good governance across West Africa, and if West African leaders are genuinely democratic, they stay and stick to the rule of law, and if the governance across the sub-region impacts on the lives of the people positively, and development, which is stated on that Article 3 of the ECOWAS Treaty, is promoted and enhanced, it will be difficult for coups to take place. And so that is why we will continue to emphasize this. And fortunately for ECOWAS leaders, unlike the immediate post-1960 period, when the general notion was that there should be no intervention in the internal affairs of other states, from the early 2000s, all of these things have been revived, such that states within sub-region, states within Africa can ask questions regarding what is happening in other states collectively. That is why we have the peer review mechanism for the AU.
Indeed.
And so this should make it a lot easier for West African leaders, if they have sincerity of purpose, if they have commitment, to be able to ask questions regarding good governance. Indeed. And when some leaders want to change constitution to have a 3rd term illegally, or a 4th term, as we're having now currently in Côte d'Ivoire, where the president, Alassane Ouattara, is trying to change constitution to have a 4th term, after change to have a 3rd term, ECOWAS should be able to pick up, on issues like this so that such things do not happen. These are things that create the environment for coups to take place, after which ECOWAS becomes reactive. ECOWAS leaders need to pay attention to all.
Absolutely, Prof.
If ECOWAS will really be effective in fulfilling its objectives.
Because the new dimension we're seeing now is the situation where the military leaders are even getting a lot of support on the ground, which makes it difficult for the sub-region organization to act. But let us take a quick look at what we understand as the reenactment of the Lagos Treaty, because this week's ceremonies include a symbolic reenactment of the Lagos Treaty. Beyond its symbolism, do you see a genuine push to reform or recommit to the treaty's original goals?
There is nothing on ground to indicate or establish that what is taking place in Lagos today, or what has been taking place since yesterday, will go beyond symbolism. There is no concrete thing on the ground to indicate that ECOWAS leaders want to move towards a different direction from what they have done in the past decade. There needs to be something more concrete that will say, okay, we want to move towards a different direction, and this is how we want to achieve it. It's only when one sees things like that, that one can say, yes, ECOWAS is going to be reinvented, so to speak, in the aftermath of this symbolism of the reenactment of the treaty, the Lagos Treaty of 1975. Something concrete, needs to be on ground, but we can't see that. We can't see that yet. But to just comment on across West Africa where there are coups and people jubilate. People jubilate because their needs were not met under civilian government. It is not enough to just say we have democratic governors, we have civilian government. It is not enough. I keep referring to that Article 3 of the ECOWAS Treaty. It says that the integration itself, economic cooperation, is not an end in itself. It's towards, ensuring that the sub-region, experiences development to start with, and also improve the quality of life of the people. That is what has not taken place, why coups are popular. So beyond the symbolism of reenacting the ECOWAS Treaty of 1975, ECOWAS leaders need to use this opportunity to reinvent the organization, because what needs to be done is clear. They need to speak, more forthrightly to one another about illegal terms. They need to speak to one another about reducing corruption. They need to speak to one another about meeting the needs of the people. These are the things that will make ECOWAS effective in the years ahead.
From the original treaty, Prof, pillars like visa-free movement, coordinated trade policy, and industrial harmonization were central. Which of these needs the most urgent revival, and why? Well,
the visa issue is, I think that one is moving smoothly. Visits to these West African countries do not require visas. At least you are free to move with your passport to any of these countries to stay for at least 90 days. I think that one is smooth. Is going quite well. But movement from one country to the other, there are too many bottlenecks, too many checkpoints, too many security posts. That needs to be looked into, so that the movement of persons we talk about will not just be rhetoric, will not just be just speaking with word of mouth. One has to see it concretely. I attended an ECOWAS gathering in Lagos here a few years ago, and some of the participants that came from Côte d'Ivoire, from Senegal, they complained very bitterly about how much they suffered along the road because too many checkpoints, too many security posts and all. This needs to be looked into. But industrialization, I think, is the most important of all of these things, of all of this. That is how West African states will come together to be able to promote industrialization, to be able to have sectoral specialization. What does this country enjoy advantage in? Let that country specialize in it, and let another country specialize on some other thing. And then by the time all of these things are put together, the sub-region will be able to enjoy, economic development and, of course, industrialization. I think that is the most important. And we can take a cue from the Southern African Development Community, SADC. It was established in 1992, but it has made far more rapid progress than ECOWAS because it has focused on industrialization, it has focused on sectoral specialization by different countries, and that has enabled them to be able to, trade and enjoy economic integration far more than ECOWAS has. These are things that will need to be done. So I think that is by far the most important, industrialization, to be achieved through sectoral specialization of different countries with purposeful, purposeful commitment by the ECOWAS leaders. When these things are done, ECOWAS will begin to get very close to those expectations that were held when it was established in 1975.
Visa-free movement, no doubt. But, Prof, I recently took a road trip from Lagos to Accra. And, the corruption at the borders is at another level entirely. Even with your passport and yellow card, you are made to pay at every junction. You literally have to beg and bargain. and that's for holiday visits. So I'm imagining what happens if it's someone who's going through with his goods and services, the impact that would have, and how it's perforating the whole idea of the AFCTA and what have you. But quickly, let's touch on the issue you mentioned earlier about the exit of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We talked about what this meant for ECOWAS's internal cohesion and its ability to manage tensions among member states. But these countries, as we speak, have also imposed tariffs on ECOWAS goods and realigned security partnerships toward Russia. What are the broader implications for regional trade and collective security?
We're very negative. The impact is very negative because these countries are also in between other West African countries, so you have to travel through them to get to other West African countries. So the exit of these countries is actually a huge negative for the sub-region. But the approach of ECOWAS, to be fair, has been very mature. I mean, I don't see what more ECOWAS could have done. ECOWAS tried to persuade them to come back. The threat of military invasion of Niger that ECOWAS leaders presented was withdrawn, and attempts were made to bring these countries back. In fact, at some point when these countries were supposed to exit, ECOWAS still left the doors opened for them to come back, and even still, allow these countries to enjoy all the benefits that they would have enjoyed if they were still members of ECOWAS. ECOWAS members did not react abrasively to the withdrawal of these countries, and I think that is the best way to approach this issue. So actually, the exit is totally the responsibility of these countries, and not anything that ECOWAS member countries did or did not do that would be a justification for them to have withdrawn. Now they are very close to Russia. That's a mistake. These countries do not come, to just be gratuitous. These countries always look for something. There are other countries in Africa where Russia's presence has been, very, very extensive. Central African Republic, South Sudan, all of these countries. Go and check out the history. Right. Russia is exploiting the minerals of these countries heavily into billions of dollars. So these countries, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, that are now close to Russia, they have just thrown away a mistress and have gone to embrace a master. They will all regret it, but unfortunately, it's the citizens of these countries that would bear the brunt at the end of the day.
Quickly,
these
Prof.
countries are not always.
Yes. If you can in a minute, I'm wondering what you think of the kind of reforms that are most urgent to restore trust among West African citizens who now see ECOWAS as a club of head of states, really, rather than a people-focused organization.
Yes, the ECOWAS leaders need to put in place policies that would enable citizens of ECOWAS to have a feel that they belong to ECOWAS, so to speak. What regionalism is to a region is what nationalism is to a nation. And initially, scholars who theorize about regional integration, such as David Mitrani, did not present regional cooperation as something that would be limited to presidents and heads of government and heads of state. Right. It was supposed to be something that would embrace everybody. And this is what ECOWAS leaders need to do, to bring everybody on board, have programs that will make ECOWAS citizens to have a feel that they belong to a community, of a region. What regionalism is to a region.
Good place to leave it. Professor David Aworawo is Professor of International Relations, Head of the Department of History and Strategic Studies at the University of Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully we'll find time to continue this conversation subsequently.
Thank you for having me.